We are so glad that you could all join us today for GLR Week's Funder to Funder conversation. We launched this special funder-focused series 4 years ago, this month, actually, responding to requests from hundreds of state and local funders in the CGLR network who are eager for more opportunities for shared learning, collaboration, and even co-investing between and among their local funder peers, but also with their more national counterparts. Since then, we have hosted nearly 40 of these funder sessions exploring philanthropic strategies related to out-of-school time learning, early learning, parent empowerment and engagement, digital connectivity and access, just to name a few. Each of these sessions has worked to engage national funders in conversation with local funders about the ways in which they were addressing that particular topic in their respective geographies of focus. Today's session is really exciting and just a little bit different from past funder sessions because we will be engaging leaders from 4 foundations who have a foot in each of those camps. They all represent national funders but they come to their work from the perspective of a local funder working in their hometown. While they are all working to improve education outcomes broadly, many of them with a cradle to career focus, they're going to be drilling down today to focus on their efforts supporting kids and families in those critical early years. And continuing our GLR Week 2024 theme, and it's call to action to focus on the gaps, they will be sharing how they are working to close the opportunity gaps that we see in terms of access to high quality early learning programs and supportive services, and how those efforts are helping to close the gap that we see in many communities as children enter kindergarten. And acknowledging that this work is hard, that the longstanding systems and structures, the policies and practices that reinforce and sustain the gaps that we see in education outcomes, that they're entrenched and hard to change, that they were there long before the pandemic and have been exacerbated over the past 4 years. We're going to ask our panelists to spend a little bit of time reflecting on what keeps them up at night as they think about this work. And then on the flip side, we're going to ask them to lift up the opportunities and the sparks of hope that they see and that help to get them back up and out there doing the work day after day. And to begin that conversation, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our panelists for today, sharing just very brief bios for each, but I'd encourage you all to check out their longer bios. It'll be dropped as a link in the chat box in just a second. Welcome first to Deirdre Johnson-Burrell. Deirdre is a senior program officer for the New Orleans team with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, leading the foundation's place-based strategy in New Orleans and developing and maintaining strategic relationships to leverage participation of other foundations, businesses, communities, governmental agencies, and other key decision makers in alignment with the Kellogg Foundation's core values and program interests. We will also be hearing from Jonathan Hui today, although Jonathan's contributions to this conversations are pre-taped because he is on vacation with his family right now and our schedules didn't align to have him join us live. Jonathan is a senior program officer at the Kresge Foundation, where he supports the Detroit program's work in early childhood and neighborhood development. He previously served as Director of Strategy and Planning at the Education Achievement Authority of Michigan. Welcome to Thomas Parker. Thomas joined the Mott Foundation in 2021 to help guide grant making and partnerships aimed at strengthening the education continuum in Flint, Michigan. Before coming to Mott, he served as superintendent of the Allentown School District in Pennsylvania, one of our CGLR network communities, for 4 years. And before that, he served as 4 years as superintendent of Ecorse Public Schools near Detroit. I'm also happy to welcome and introduce Ruby Sullivan. Ruby serves as Senior Associate for Education Achievement at the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Atlanta Civic site, where she is responsible for education-related investments in the communities that make up Atlanta's Neighborhood Planning Unit V, or NPUV, as well as the Atlanta Public Schools District and the broader state. Before coming to Casey, she served as the Executive Director of Data and Information in Atlanta Public Schools. And to guide us through the conversation today is Deborah Jacobs. Deborah serves as the president and CEO of the Patterson Foundation, based in Sarasota, Florida, where she leads the foundation in its work to strengthen the efforts of people, organizations, and communities. A core initiative of the Patterson Foundation is the Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading, a CGLR community coalition that stretches across 4 counties in Florida's Suncoast region. But Patterson also functions as a national funder and is one of CGLR's enterprise funders, investing in the backbone supports provided by CGLR for its nationwide network, including these webinars. So thank you, Deborah, for that. Thanks to you to all of our panelists, and I'll pass it over to Deborah now to guide us through the conversation.
Thank you. Well done, Erin and Sarah, getting us off the dime. I also want to tell everybody who's on this webinar, we must be very important because the managing director of the overall campaign for grade level reading has chosen to be with us. So we welcome Ralph Smith. He is not allowed a speaking part because then all you would want to do is listen to Ralph Smith. So Ralph, give a wave to people so that they know you are holding us to task and listening to all the wisdom that shall be flowing through this webinar. As we head in with learning about each of these funders, I want to set a little bit of a context about more than money philanthropy. We all have learned over time that it's more than money, that we have the ability to use our various forms of social capital. And these relationships are so important, from the national funder to the local funder. It really comes down to change happens at the speed of trust, and how do we work together? What's particularly exciting about these panelists today, not only are they important in their current position, but they come from other sectors than the nonprofit or the philanthropy sector. So at the Patterson Foundation, we always talk about we need 5 sectors engaged for meaningful change. We need people, business, nonprofits, government, and the media. And if we do not have all of those sectors, we might not be able to make the change that we patiently are tenaciously working on. So as Sarah said, we're very fortunate to have incredible talent on this webinar. And I'm going to remind all of us, we're going to look at this through the lens of what are we doing from birth to kindergarten? Because those are those formative years that if the kids don't arrive ready for school, they're going to be challenged throughout their entire academic path. So we're going to get started. And again, reminding national funders, who a couple of them are actually working in their hometown. So they actually bring a little bit more cred to the work that's being done. Because many of you might have done your research on each of the funders, some of you might not have had time to. So we're going to ask each one of our funders to take about 4 or 5 minutes to give us some insight into what their place-based strategies are, who their key partners' relationships are, some highlights, and how they're measuring success. So to get us going, I'm going to ask Deirdre if you'd be our inaugural speaker here and give us a sense on how Kellogg is thinking about in doing this work. Oh, you're muted. Demute.
It wouldn't have been a call if we didn't have that moment. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. And again, thank you for the question, Deborah. I'm going to do a little bit of context and I'm going to try to zoom right on through this. As many of you know, the Kellogg Foundation was founded in 1930 by breakfast cereal innovator Will Keith Kellogg, saying, use the money as you please, as long as it promotes the health, happiness, and well-being of children. And for the past 94 years, that has been our North Star. And we do that work through the framework of thriving children, working families, and equitable communities, recognizing that children can't really thrive if their families aren't economically secure, and their families can't be economically secure if they're not in equitable communities. And that lays really the groundwork for our place-based work. And while the foundation has been investing in New Orleans since 1940, it named New Orleans as a priority place in 2008. And you've gone great to that next slide. And so our work in New Orleans, we have centered, we're following Mr. Kellogg's
that North Star and really have framed our work. Our partners talk about it this way, making New Orleans a child-centered city. And our work in the ECE space has really taken an ecosystem, system building approach. We're working to build coherence, cohesion, and coordination in that broader system, increasing access, improving quality, and creating thriving educational environments. And just a little bit about what do we mean by that? Coherence, cohesion, coordination. Coherent in the sense that if it's a system, it makes sense to families, that they can look at it and see where to access services, where do they get the support, where do they engage and lend their voices. Cohesion in the sense that the many diverse partners that work in the ECE ecosystem continue to work together in ways that like make sense, and that over time coordination, that we'll start to see greater efficiencies, and that there will be an interdependent, aligned systems change agenda. And in terms of who of our partners are, now that question, you know that's a challenging question, because there's always the risk of forgetting folks. So I'll just say our partners include, but are not limited to, of course, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, here with the United Way of Southeast Louisiana, folks like Agenda for Children, advocacy partners like the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, non-traditional early childhood providers like Training Grounds, and an exciting partner for providers by providers that is really an umbrella entity for center directors to support advocacy, to drive quality at the center level. And then when we talk about our measures of success, they absolutely fit in those three buckets. We're excited that the work over that generational commitment has really been about going deep, recognizing that in order to, to go deep, you kind of got to stay long. And what we've seen is the arc, the benefit of being able to do that. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about what that arc has meant. So where we are now in ECE certainly isn't where we were a decade ago. And when we talk about, again, things we measure in terms of measure of success, quality, looking at how are we improving quality, we're excited to say that in New Orleans now 94% of our centers, we have the highest proficiency rating that we've ever had, but 94% of publicly funded centers are quality. So we are looking at metrics for quality. We are looking at metrics for how do we increase access to publicly funded seats. We've seen great strides there. A couple of years ago, New Orleans voters approved a $21 million annual millage to increase access to early childhood seats. So we look at leading indicators like that, but we're also looking at, lagging indicators like that, but we're also looking at leading indicators around how supply and demand, educator attrition. So we'll have an opportunity, hopefully, to get into that more, but that's a snapshot on our approach.
Well, and I think you painted a picture beautifully of an ecosystem when you talked about the various partners that are in the network sharing an aspiration about children. And so it's a great ecosystem. And a reminder, there's no single program, organization, process, or policy. It's how we weave them all together, and we've got to be at the table to weave it. So great insight, and I bet we could do a whole webinar with Deirdre. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Thomas for his 5-minute summary of the incredible work that's going on in Flint, Michigan, which, Thomas, if I read my national press directly, it's not like Flint's not without challenges.
Absolutely not without challenges, but not without great opportunity as well. And I think that underscores exactly the work that the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation supports in Flint, and connects back to your comments about not one single table, but multiple people sitting at multiple tables that really create impact for kids and communities. The Charles Stewart Mott Foundation has 4 program areas. We have a national education team, a civil society team, as well as an environment team. And our largest grant making area is our local place-based team, the Flint Area Program. And with the Flint Area Program, 4 core areas: revitalizing the education continuum, enriching lives through arts and culture, restoring community vitality, and meeting evolving community needs. And really situating a conversation about early childhood in the space where we sit within the foundation, and then even education work sits within the Flint area team, is really critical and important, knowing that to Deirdre's point, it's the whole child and the whole community that needs to thrive, that creates opportunity and outcomes for success.
You're still going, aren't you?
Yep, I'm good.
Good.
So revitalizing the education continuum as a core tenet of our Flint area team. You'll see here some of the objectives under that core area. It really, early childhood education is a core area for us, and working to weave together success in early childhood with K-12 as well as college and career pathways. So focusing on the gaps in early childhood, but ensuring that that work informs how we approach the work at multiple levels is critical, and is critical for our strategy. So in the early childhood space, we really focus on supporting early learning through policy, practice, and innovation. And again, weaving all three of those together, knowing that each leg to that stool is really critical for sustained success for kids and community in Flint. First and foremost, one of our tenets is bolstering our citywide focus on early learning with the Flint Early Childhood Collaborative. And the Flint Early Childhood Collaborative really creates an opportunity for community members, funders, and organizations that provide direct service for kids to share a table to really discuss and have the conversations about the critical elements necessary for early childhood success, focusing on kids 0 through 5. So certain initiatives like coordinated enrollment come out of our Flint Early Childhood Collaborative, really creating the opportunity to strengthen the continuum across the city of Flint. Next, we focus on expanding support for Flint kids with community education, pre-K-12, and thinking about early childhood as it connects to the pre-K-12 space is really important. We have 16 sites and over 3,000 students being served with our community education program, and that program weaves together, that initiative rather, weaves together the critical supports necessary for children in their early years through their K-12 experience. In addition, we support new and renovated high-quality early childhood centers. So we have a number of centers that receive some direct support from the Mott Foundation from a funding standpoint. Educare Flint is one of our cornerstone programs here in the city of Flint. It was created to address, critical needs in our community for kids after the water crisis in Flint. It's a demonstration site for early childhood in Flint. And to that point, really awesome. Yesterday, the governor visited Flint to sign the K-12 school age budget in Educare Flint, really underscoring the value of that demonstration site, not just to Flint, but to the rest of the state as well. Cummings Great Expectations and Summerfield are additional sites where we're working to provide resources to support high quality early learning for kids. And Brownell Homes is another site in Flint Community Schools with a renovated K-12 campus and a focus on an early childhood wing that serves children 6 weeks through 4 years old. And lastly, in that category, the launching of the Flint Center for Educational Excellence, which is a new organization that was funded by the Mott Foundation to help Flint kids thrive. So the network weaves together 6 initiatives designed to really impact Flint kids, parents, and community in a way that will support long-term success, not just for individual kids, but for systems that are supporting kids in the Flint community. And this time, really lastly, RX Kids. RX Kids, a citywide program aimed to significantly reduce childhood poverty, creating cash payments to Flint mothers during pregnancy and throughout the first year of life. Launched in Flint earlier this year. If you may have heard some more information about that program, and is now in the new budget for the state, expanding to other cities potentially across Michigan, but really impactful as an initiative to reduce the impact of poverty early in children's life.
And Thomas, I want to just talk about when I started Flint's not without its challenges, and you appropriately said, but boy, do we have opportunities. And you have got some real change makers who have stepped up and said, this is not acceptable. We're going to work together and we're going to have creative solutions. So bravo to Flint, and the state of Michigan is watching, as is the nation. So bravo to the Mott Foundation for its leadership there. All right, we're now going to give Ruby the opportunity to give us a glimpse into the Annie Casey Foundation and your work in Atlanta. So take it away, Ruby.
Afternoon, greetings from Atlanta. As many of you may be familiar with the Annie Casey Foundation for our annual Kids Count work report, our work in juvenile justice, and our work in family well-being strategies. You might not be as familiar with our local place-based sites. We have 2 place-based sites, one here in Atlanta and another in Baltimore City. So Casey started, Annie Casey Foundation is founded, Jim Casey, the founder of UPS, is our founder, and we're named after his mother, who was responsible for raising, as a single mom, him and his siblings. So the work around child welfare, family well-being strategy really leads us into our mission, where we're building brighter futures for children and families. Here in Atlanta, in our place-based work, and this is true in Baltimore as well, we focus on 3 strategy areas. One is education, that's the one I'm responsible for. The other is economic opportunity, and then the third is known as neighborhood transformation, and that includes things like housing, building affordable housing, et cetera. We believe and know for a fact that life happens at the intersection of all of those 3 things, and then without us working together, we cannot make the changes on behalf of the community members that we represent. So it's very important that we think about all 3 collectively. Now, in the education portfolio, the portfolio I'm responsible for, we like to think of it as that we're pre-K to career, because we have over the last 3 years begun a lot of work in the Black maternal health space, because without healthy mothers, we can't even begin to think about healthy children. And with the maternal mortality rates in Atlanta and in Georgia specifically being a huge struggle, 3 times that of white women, Black women passed while giving birth. So it's very important for us to start there. So that all the way up through career, right, and post-secondary. We center race equity in everything that we do. We really take a targeted universalism approach. We use data. We try and understand the local context, which is very, very important, especially as national funders. We often find ourselves or may run into our colleagues in our cities, and they're following national data. And oftentimes those national data do not play out in our very localized communities. So it's very important that you first understand that context of where we are. And we do that by listening a lot. We also do it through a lot of deep data analysis. And there's a report that we just released, the Changing the Odds report. We really believe that we've got to change the odds for our children and families instead of expecting them to beat the odds, which is what historically we have expected our children and families to do. Now, when it comes to early learning specifically, we really like to think of our work in balancing both practice or program, policy, and platform, right? So I kind of have some influence back to the earlier conversation about it's not just the money, right? I find that the influence matters a lot more, especially being an Atlanta native and a product of our school system here. Those relationships go very, very deep. Here locally in our practice or in our programming, through Sheltering Arms, we have the only Educare center, and I heard Thomas talk about Educare. We have the only Educare center in the state of Georgia, right here in the Mechanicsville community, very, very close by. It is co-located with an elementary school. That is a really important part of our work. and making sure that that transition from early learning into elementary school space is strong and that those relationships amongst those teachers are strong as well. When it comes to policy, we work at the state level very closely with the with GEARS. It's the Georgia Early Education Alliance for Ready Students. I always stumble over that. I'm like, where are the E's? Where are the A's? So GEARS is a very important partner to us. They are so important to us that they lead what is called Promising All Atlanta Children Thrive, the PACT. The PACT is the first of its kind in a private-public partnership in the city of Atlanta that was initiated by the mayor's office, the City of Atlanta office, in partnership with Atlanta Public Schools. $20 million investment with $5 million from the school district, $5 million from the city, and the rest in private funding. So GEARS runs that for us, and you can see that's an example of a space where all of us are together in that work. Now, how do we measure our success? Capacity and quality, right, are the two go-to answers, right? We need more spaces, especially on the south side of Atlanta, back to understanding the data of where you are, of your place. But those places can't just be places, they can't just be seats. What's the quality of those seats, especially on the south side of Atlanta? So that's also very important to us. GEARS and another partnership created a readiness radar that's available online. Any one of you can go and look at it. You can see a map across Georgia of where our centers are located, what their capacity is, and their quality ranking, which we have a quality rated system here in Georgia. And then finally, it wouldn't be Casey if I didn't talk about, when we talk about measurement, we really think a lot, how many, how much, how often, and are we better off? Are the communities better off once we have been there? Have we worked our way out of a job and been able to move on to the next body of work, right? That's really ideally what we'd like to see. But again, just to reiterate the importance of place and not just coming in with national data, with national context. It is very critical that we get all the way down to the neighborhood level in our work, even as a national funder here in place.
Well, and I love it when I'm part of these webinars because I'm always looking for nuggets that I can borrow and keep. Love the phrase, let's change the odds rather than try to beat the odds. There's a keeper. I'm going to keep that for other things to think about. Another thing that Casey is so good with the data, but you talked about it, Ruby, in terms of getting down with the people, with the neighborhoods, with the organizations. Another phrase that we all need to keep in mind: no data without stories, no stories without data, because we've got to have the head and the heart in our work, knowing that this is long-term hard work that we are doing. So we got to blend both of those. So we'll be circling back with more questions. We are now going to test the power of technology, where Jonathan is going to wing in on his pre-recorded answer to the question, tell us about Kresge's work locally. So let's see how this works.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think this topic is really important, really thinking about how the role of place connects to a broader national agenda, and a national network is a critical conversation. So thank you for having me. I think at Kresge in Detroit, we have thought about a cradle to career approach that really centers on the early years, deeply rooted in place. And we've thought about that in the framework of what we're calling cradle to career neighborhoods. We recognize that families experience opportunity in the context of their neighborhoods, that families want to live in and grow in the neighborhoods where they're situated. And so, part of our approach is really thinking about, how can we provide cradle to career opportunities deeply in neighborhoods where families already are living, with a goal of retaining them in neighborhoods, right? The goal is that we can provide and create neighborhood environments where families can thrive in, can experience educational opportunity, and ultimately they want to raise their kids there. They can experience opportunity all the way from cradle to career without having to move. Part of that is what you see here is the Mary Grove Learning Community. It's a 53-acre educational campus in Northwest Detroit, deep in a residential community, in a neighborhood that has census tracts that range from household incomes of about $25,000 to household incomes of about $150,000. And so it's racially, socioeconomically diverse, and really thinking about how a cradle to career educational campus can really be a driver for economic development, for equitable economic development that does not displace families, but instead allows families to remain in that neighborhood. As you see here, that cradle to career educational approach really centers on the transition between early childhood and kindergarten. You can see here on this screen that families and children can come as early as 6 weeks old to a brand new early childhood center operated by a Head Start provider that is actually operating a mixed income model where you can receive Head Start funding, or you can be a private pay family, go to this early childhood center, and then transition into the K-12 school, and then also have access to post-secondary and career programming. That's the vision, right? The vision is for families to be able to experience all of their educational programming and out-of-school programming within their neighborhood so that they can raise their kids, raise their families in the places where they're from. And moving into kind of some more specifics, on the Mary Grove Learning Community campus, it is a one-stop, right, student and family experience. And how we've really thought about the connectivity between pre-K, right, at the Early Education Center, and K in kindergarten at the elementary school is to be intentional about a few practices for kindergarten readiness that so many of our partners around the country have been doing, and so many of our partners in Detroit have been doing. How do we have those practices live and breathe and come alive for families on that campus and in their neighborhood? Part of that is joint professional development, where the early educators and the early elementary teachers are doing professional development together. They have a shared definition of success. They have a shared definition of learning targets. They are using an aligned curriculum and moving toward having a single curriculum throughout ages 0 through 8. That's the goal we're working towards in order to have a continuous and shared experience. There's data sharing between the Early Education Center and the kindergarten program, where before kindergarten every year, the early educators are sitting down with the kindergarten teachers and going through their rosters and sharing about students' strengths and areas of improvement and how they're doing is aligned to the learning outcomes. They're sharing what the students like and dislike, right? It's part of the culture work too, and not just about instruction, but it's about building a culture that is aligned and where students feel like they're not navigating in a totally new environment. And so there's automatic enrollment into the elementary program for graduates of the Early Education Center. It's two entirely different systems that we know families often fall through the cracks in. But what we're excited about is the opportunity to really pilot a first of these programs in Detroit, where, if you come from the Early Education Center and you live in the city of Detroit, you have admission into the elementary program to create that seamless transition. Students also move in a single cohort. And so a lot of students are in the same class in pre-K, and that's a big jump, right? We know that's a big jump from small, 16-person classrooms to 25-person classrooms. And so moving as a single cohort really helps bridge the student experience and the culture. And then there are the intangibles, right? And the students, really thanks to Starfish Family Services that runs the Early Education Center, the Detroit Public Schools Community District that runs the K-12 school. The pre-K teachers are showing up to the birthday parties for students in the kindergarten class, right? They're welcoming students on the first day of elementary school so that the students are not as afraid moving up to kindergarten. So it's not just the data, it's not just PD, it's not just enrollment, it's culture building around how to create a seamless experience for students and for families. And then finally, you'll see how this manifests itself at a neighborhood level. And this is what we're calling child and family-centered neighborhoods, is how do we create neighborhoods that go beyond the walls of schools? How do we think about entire neighborhoods that support children and their families and where families want to raise their children? We know that transitions, especially between early elementary, especially from high school to college and middle to high school, those are times where families leave their neighborhoods. That has economic development implications, and that has family implications, right? That creates instability for families. We know that so many families want to stay in the neighborhoods, but they can't because they don't have the amenities, they don't have the educational opportunities. And really thanks to our neighborhood community development organizations, thanks to parks organizations, thanks to our friends at the city, the school district, coming together to reimagine how neighborhoods can center kids and families, to think about how do we activate public spaces focused on children? How do we think about the physical connectedness of a neighborhood to make them more walkable, to make sidewalks wider, to make neighborhoods more artistically and culturally vibrant for kids, so that families can experience really, their children's educational careers in that neighborhood. And the benchmark really being retention, for families to stay in these neighborhoods, for the children to thrive, and really for these amenities to be able to wrap around all of our children, especially in those gaps.
So we're going to move on to the next part, and don't worry, we are going to have our Q&A at the end, but we've got some more things to learn from our panelists today. So the next thing we're going to talk about in the Patterson Foundation, we often talk about building connective tissue. And connective tissue is a medical term. It's in our, it's part of our biology, but you can't build connective tissue too quickly, or it'll snap. You can't go too small, it's wussy. So the question is, building relationships, building connective tissue, relationships with other people. It's a role that national funders are always faced with the challenge of, because you can't arrive with all the answers, because if we arrive with all the answers, we may not get people to come to the party together. So I'd love to listen to some perspective on how do you build those relationships? How do we foster them between national, and what really makes these relationships sing? And I'm going to start this time with Jonathan. So we're going back to technology to hear about relationship effectiveness building.
We have the luxury of being both a national funder and a place-based funder. But I think, for us, it really starts with place. What drives our strategy are the priorities in place. What drives how we interact with our partners are really rooted in the relationships that exist in place. And I think that's important because we believe that families experience opportunity, that families experience everything in the context of place. And so you can't do anything outside of the context of places, and not just places broadly, but specific neighborhoods, right? Every neighborhood has a different context. They have a unique history. And we have to honor that. And so I think a lot of that, at least for folks like us working in education, it's stepping outside of the world in education, because oftentimes education thinks as at a citywide level or a countywide level or a statewide level. And oftentimes we can lose the context of very, very hyper-local places, like the neighborhood level, like the zip code level. And I think for us, a lot of that starts with honoring the expertise of neighborhood-based organizations, of community development organizations that are led by resident leaders that have been in the neighborhood for generations. Those are folks that many of them have often worked outside of the education system, right? That they've been connectors of families into the education system, but I think are really important partners and need to be formal partners to the education system. And a lot of our learnings come from them, come from resident leaders who are talking to residents every single day, um, who have the historical context of neighborhoods, who understand how neighborhoods have been invested in and disinvested in, who understand how disinvestment has been oftentimes rooted in racial lines. And I think, you know, we're really grateful for those neighborhood leaders that are able to be really honest and say, you know, this is the context and these are the priorities we're hearing from our residents. And I think rooting our place-based work in that, and then hearing them and say, how can we bring any disciplinary expertise, any national connections to help advance that work? But oftentimes it starts with the priorities they identify, and then we then go into our toolbox. We go talk to our national partners to say, well, do any of you have folks from other cities that might have lessons that resonate with these, right? Can we learn from a Cleveland, a Memphis, a New Orleans, a Flint? And I think that's where we feel like we can add value is by listening, but also then bringing in any partners from other communities for shared learning, but also shared advocacy, right? Folks are experiencing similar things. How do we advocate together and layer that in? But really that starts with understanding the context of place to start with.
Atlanta. Hey, you know everything there is to know about Atlanta. Oh, she's now talking with her Annie Casey hat. How do you juggle being authentic in your relationship building with people?
You know, if you don't have the privilege of being born and raised in such a great place as Atlanta and attending the schools and knowing everyone in all the systems, that's a little bit more difficult, but there's certainly ways to do it. I definitely leverage the relationships that I've built. I literally tell people I've been a partner with Atlanta Public Schools since 1978, which I think I was in like first grade. So many of the same people, you know, you show up, right? But let's say you don't have that luxury and privilege. You know, relationships, we talked about this before, it's about trust. And how do you build trust? And this was in a former role that I've had in another place. And the ways in which I build trust are one, content knowledge, right? It's very similar to being a teacher. Do you know what you're talking about? When you enter a space and you're asked to be there for a reason, do you have that content knowledge? Do people know that you care? Do people know that you care about the outcomes? Are you in it for the long haul? Or are you just here for 3 years until you move on to the next job and the next space? And I'm doing these in opposite order because the most important one is listening, listening, listening to the people that you serve. In my opinion, my portfolio belongs to the community, and I am the navigator of those funds on behalf and alongside our community. And our community in Atlanta, we're, you know, a city of neighborhoods, as many are, but Maynard Jackson, when he was mayor, created a neighborhood planning unit governance system. So you heard it in our intro, neighborhood planning unit V, which is where we are located. It's where I'm sitting right now in the Pittsburgh community. It consists of 5 neighborhoods. Each of those neighborhoods have their own neighborhood organizations, community organizations. We attend those meetings. We go to every one of those meetings and we listen. We listen. And we're also there as community members now that our offices are here as well. So I think I think a lot of it the same way I thought of it when I was a teacher and building relationships with my students is I didn't want my students to be tourists in my classroom. They were citizens. Right. So how do we do the same thing in our work here? How do we democratize our work in such a way that we are listening in those community meetings, in school board meetings, to our principals, to our students? To our students and our young parents in these early learning spaces, what do they need? What are the communities in which they reside? What are their needs in that very specific community? So again, you know, relationships and you know, not everybody's as lucky as I am and from a great place like Atlanta. Sorry, but there are still ways if you're not from here to build those relationships. And just like a teacher, you need to go in with caring, empathy. You're not about to lead. You show up and you need to know what you're talking about and you need to know how to make connections to your larger organization. Like for me at Casey, other sections and departments at Casey that then I'm able to connect people with to get exactly what it is the community members are telling me that they need. So relationships and trust.
Well, and I'm listening through your passion there, okay? And I'm guessing that you're also very good at saying, I don't know, help me understand. Because we don't always need to arrive with the answer. We can be
Absolutely.
good students as well. We can, everyone.
Absolutely.
So I just am checking if that works for you or not.
Yes, we learn every day. We're always learners. If we're not, then we don't need to be in this role, honestly.
Right, right. All right, let's head over into Thomas. Give us a little bit of how you look at relationships and how it plays out in your day to day.
Thank you. I not fortunate enough to be from Atlanta, but I am from a small town in Tillatopa, Mississippi. And understanding how to enter spaces when you're from a small place is really important. So I use that as, a way to think about how the entry into Flint has been really critical in terms of being present and building relationships based on presence, based on trust, and based on credibility. And I think that's been really key for me in entering this space and being able to be, successful and engaging and supporting the great work that happens in Flint. Thinking about how we as a national funder enter that space in the local place-based funding space, it's also really similar, right? How do you focus on being present? How do you focus on being credible? How do you focus on listening and building relationships? And we have a number of mechanisms that are, designed to do that, right? There's the interpersonal piece of just really building relationships, listening, showing up to Ruby's point at the school board meetings, showing up at the community meetings and the spaces that are critical and important, right? Being at the Barnell Homes Neighborhood Association meeting is really critical and important if you're supporting the community and understanding what's valuable. But there are also kind of structural components. So, Focus on Flint is a publication and a process that one of my colleagues here at the foundation leads, that's really designed as a mechanism that allows us to listen to and hear the perspective of the Flint community. And that then helps to guide how we think about our local grant making. There are relationships that are built, interpersonally and structurally with tables that we sit at and set with other local funders, just so that we know and understand from their perspective how they can help us inform how we perceive some of our strategy, with them being a bit more on the ground and community based. So those structural components are really important. Those interpersonal components are really important in terms of how the Mott Foundation really sits in Flint as a shoulder partner with a number of other funders, as well as community-based organizations, and prioritizes communication and collaboration and ensures that those relationships are really solid and strong. And the last piece I'll say, one of my former superintendents used to always use the phrase, keeping the main thing the main thing. And I was like, yeah, that's a really great point. Keep the main thing the main thing. And if the main thing is ensuring that kids are successful and that we're working together, all of our resources, to ensure that kids are thriving, then in any space where there's a table or not a table, we'll find ways to come together, collaborate, and communicate effectively, because we're all aligned on the outcome, which is kids in Flint really thriving.
It's amazing what we can do when we share the same aspiration.
Absolutely.
We can start disagreeing and tussle, but if we go back to the main thing or the shared aspiration, we can get centered again. And in case people weren't listening to every pearl of wisdom that comes out from Thomas, I want to make sure you did hear him talk about shoulder, keeping the shoulder funders. He's walking alongside. He doesn't have to be the main funder. He's working with others. So I love that image of shoulder to shoulder, and we're coming together here. Bravo, bravo. Thomas, did I interrupt you before you were done, though? I apologize if I did.
No,
You're good? You're good? Okay. All right, Deirdre, take us on home on this relationship building.
Yes. So I want to say a couple things here. One is to just say that first, that our position has evolved on this over time. In some ways, in terms of like, what does it mean to, how do we start to get more proximate? I would lead and say that positionality matters, proximity, right, matters. And one of the things I didn't talk about earlier was what we call our DNA, racial equity, community engagement, and leadership. So I will continue to come back sort of to the foundation's values, because we strive not to just talk about it, but to be about it, to not just grant make, but to be those very things, to embody that in our ways of working. So when we talk about, I think the first place that the foundation really started to lay a foundation for trust, honestly, was in that naming of New Orleans as a priority place in 2008. Of course, that's no surprise to anyone that's not very long in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And I think there was a real recognition, listening to community, right? That what it takes to do transformational work, we are not going to turn this in 3 years. We're not going to turn it in 5. How do we walk alongside this community, right, to achieve what New Orleans wants for itself? And that was really the beginning of that. And the first, sort of when New Orleans became a priority place, we had program officers that were based in Michigan, our great home state. And we have really recognized that proximity matters, right? And so we have an office in New Orleans. And we have a team based in New Orleans that has New Orleans residents, right? So really grounding in we are as vested, our team here as is vested in what we're doing, because we are also living inside of the experience, right? And I think we also then, like Mr. Kellogg, one of his quotes is like, people have the inherent ability to solve their own problems. So to the point that Ruby has raised, Thomas has raised, Jonathan remotely has raised, all of our work is really grounded in listening. We're not driving a strategy that's the Kellogg Foundation strategy. Our strategy is grounded in the ends that this community is focused on, right? And how do we come alongside, to the shouldering that Thomas lifted up, how do we come alongside? And I think we work with intention to balance that, like let's just name the thing, right? The power. How do we balance our power in the room? So how do we work alongside with our local funder partners and balance our voice in those conversations? We, in 2015, were a part of, and Kresge was one of them, there were nine other foundations that formed what's called the Greater New Orleans Funders Network. And we really felt like the work to do transformative work in the region, to realize equity, and required us to work together, right? To, again, walk the talk. We tell partners all the time, collaborate, work together, right? But can we walk that talk in philanthropy? And so really having tables like that center grantee partner voice, that really create an opportunity for us to do more together. So we're listening together, we're learning together, and we're leveraging and acting together, right? So I would say collectively, those things are how we have, and just staying the course. It's how we've really cultivated relationships, trusting relationships with our partners here.
Well, and one of the things I'm going to ask all our panelists to come live, all right, for this last question, and then we will turn it over to get some audience questions talked about, is Deirdre brought up the point about, Katrina was a long time ago and we're still learning from Katrina. Well, guess what? We all went through a pandemic. And we're all just even trying to figure out how bad, how good, what those gaps were that came out of the pandemic, that every one of those children were not in a dress rehearsal. This was, whether they were a baby, a 1, a 2, a 3-year-old, this was real life that they experienced with the pandemic. And now we're working on, so what do we do about those gaps? I'm going to bet you that each one of our panelists here sometimes stay up at night going, what am I gonna do? Because I want to fix this. I want to make it better. So I'm gonna ask you both all to share what keeps you up at night, but then what gives you the spring in your step in the morning because you've got hope and you see good. All right. So I want both sides of the what keeps you up at night and what gives you the spring in your step. So Ruby, can you take that on first?
Sure. So what keeps me up at night, all night and all day is, being from a data background, until race is no longer a predictor in student learning outcomes, I will never be satisfied. My children will never be satisfied. Anyone I come in contact with and am able to share that message, that's what keeps me up at night in every single aspect of my work. Um, I also think a lot about kinder-ready students versus kinder-ready schools. When we think about this co-location of early learning space with an elementary school, our youth leaving educare are certainly kinder-ready, but is the school that's receiving them ready for them? And we're finding that that is not the case. And so we've got to do a lot. There's a lot of opportunity there, right, to shore up that connection. That opportunity gets even more difficult when we talk about the workforce issues, from low pay, the access. When we think about capacity in early learning space, it's not really capacity if there's not a teacher there to teach in that room, right? So a lot of these numbers that we talk about, capacity numbers, are not, they're not real. You go into that center space and there are 2 empty classrooms because there's not staff, because we don't pay enough. They're not treated like professionals. We know all. So I have a lot that keeps me up a lot, right? But as an old math teacher, I see everything. Every one of those things that keeps me up at night, they're all measurable, both qualitatively and quantitatively, right? And those are opportunities for me. Those are the things that I will continue to fight, both in policy, with an equity policy in the K-12 space, and digging deeper into the early learning space with race equity, being unapologetic about it. Especially in these days and times when there's a freezing, intentional freezing going on around identity, especially in the state of Georgia and other states as well. So that's what keeps me up at night, but they are also, flip of the coin, the same things that for me I see as a named problem that we can go after it, and with the right people, including being led by the community and the youth, we can get there.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. Okay. I'm feeling the energy, feeling the hope here. All right, Deirdre, give us the what keeps you up and what spurs you on in the morning.
Can I just say cosign? Right? Like everything that Ruby said. Because there really is, I think it is absolutely, I'll say that, one of the things that I am always thinking about, that is the thing that is like, how are we building a net that works for families? That the work that we're doing is materially felt by families, and that we're making the connection between, yes, the great things that are happening in ECE, but how are we connecting that to the economic security things, right? How are we connecting that to the community equity element? So talk about MCH, right? Like, how are we making sure that our investments are tethered in ways that make a material difference for families that's felt, right? So that is a real thing. It's an active grappling, right? But I would also co-sign 110%, right? Like, we can't get that. We've seen incredible progress in the early side of the ECE, improvements in quality, like we're winning there. So to the point of the kinder ready kids, but then what about, we're not seeing quite the same level of progress as we march toward 3rd grade reading, right? And so how do we translate what has been really great progress in 0 to 5? How do we translate that into our K-12 system in systemic ways, right? That our babies show are bright and brilliant and ready. And how do we give them a system that meets them to reach that critical next milestone of numeracy and literacy proficiency by 3rd grade? Big, like that thing. And then that, like, inside this system that we are building a system that is not extractive. How do we make this, right? Like, we can't say we all about children and all about families, and then the workers in the system, we're not making that a viable career path, right? And so how we deal with educator attrition, how do we really build parity inside the field? That's a real thing, because we know in education in general, teacher quality is the single most influential school-based factor, right? And so we have to, like, do something with that workforce challenge. Has to, like, really solving that. So those are the things. And the things that give me hope, that bring light, like, honestly, it's the ingenuity of our partners, right? Like, they just keep innovating, they keep pushing, and the wins that we have had, right? So we know it's possible. Like 10 years ago, it was not even fathomable, like, that we would have a city funded, like a publicly funded millage for early childhood, that we would have a system for ECE in Louisiana, that Louisiana will be ranked 8th in ECE systems, unfathomable at a decade ago. And our partners just keep building. So I'm getting up to show up for the work that they're doing and saying we're going to stand right with you.
All right, we're going. We've got it. All right. We don't have everything answered, but we've got a path and we're going forward. All right, Thomas, what keeps you awake and what gets you up?
Can I do the same? Amen.
No, you may not say echo. No, I want to hear Thomas.
I think we're absolutely in the same place. Those things that are really important and really critical. I echo the sentiments of my colleagues. I think the things that keep me up at night, intergenerational poverty, right? Knowing that the kids that are experiencing these challenges, they are the same challenges that their parents experience. And if there isn't some level of systemic intervention, will be the same challenges that their children experience. And that's an issue. Defining impact versus intent is really critical for me. There's lots of energy around great things that are happening for kids, for community in the field with great intention. Ensuring that we find spaces to align that to collective impact, I think, is something that keeps me up at night. And this is a term I stole from one of my colleagues, Jennifer. She talked about the poly crisis, right? So the poly crisis really being those multiple challenges that exist at one time, and knowing where to start and where to begin is something that keeps me up at night. Is it health? Is it housing? Is it education? Is it each of them? And what happens if we invest time, energy, resources in one and not the other, right? What's the opportunity cost for not pushing heavily on each of those as a place-based funder? That's something that we really sit with consistently. Engaging and improving systems that perpetuate poverty or poor outcomes for kids and families. As a K-12 educator that transitioned to philanthropy, thinking again about intergenerational poverty and how systems impact either perpetuating that continuance or really creating space and opportunity for kids and families at the earliest level to lift out of some of those generational spaces. And again, underscoring whether or not we're focusing resources and energy on programmatic improvement or systems change. Lots of great programs. How do we align those to creating or challenging systems that are not creating great outcomes for kids and families? And what gives me hope? What gives me hope? I remember early in the process of joining my foundation, I had a conversation with the CEO, and what really sold me was a simple vision on great schools for kids where their success isn't determined by zip code. And that phrase just consistently used. We want great school for kids. That zip code doesn't determine success and outcomes. Knowing that that's the North Star is what gives me hope and keeps me going, because we're beginning to see in Flint, some of those things take root. So the Educare Flint that we talked about earlier is an example of that. We have the Network for School Excellence, which under the Flint Center for Educational Excellence weaves together 8 schools across 6 school districts to really think about how we improve outcomes for Flint kids. And that's focused on the early years success in K-12 systems. We're beginning to see traction in improving outcomes for kids and doing so where zip code doesn't determine success. We have the pieces. Learning how to coordinate and leverage them better for impact is important. Focusing on education in the state budget in Michigan inspires me daily. Just yesterday, our governor signed a historic education state aid budget that increases funding for kids in significant areas. And a lot of that work doesn't happen without, people that are community-based, working with philanthropy, working with state government, and everybody being aligned that knowing what's important for kids and funding what's important for kids is a priority. So the Michigan Guarantee, pre-K for all, community college, free community college for all, those are things that inspire me because that's the impact of eliminating the zip code determining success for kids and families. And lastly, what inspires me every day, it's the people. It's Jeanette Edwards from the Burnell Homes Neighborhood Association. It's the tireless advocates that are working in community each and every day and standing with, beside, and often in front of organizations saying, this is my home, and this is where we're going to ensure that we give kids and families the best opportunity for success. So the people that do this work every day really brings the inspiration, whether that's individuals that represent themselves and their community or other peer funders that are really pushing to ensure that all of our work is to support thriving kids.
I hope everybody's feeling the energy of these three about it's a lot, but we're doing it. We've got a whole variety of questions in the chat. I'm going to try and consolidate them a little bit for us. It's about this measuring success. Is it when you're going to put a big check mark and say, we're done, we're out of here? Or how do we think about, is it incremental success? How do we tell people we did this, but now we got to do this? How, as a national funder, do you think about when you're done, when you're already demonstrating you're in it for the long term, but you're not always doing the same thing all the time? All right, so please talk about this evolving effort for success measures along the way. Could someone talk about that? Is it successful when government takes over and we can walk away? Is it success when neighborhoods no longer need us? What's success? How do you incrementalize success?
Yeah, I think it evolves, right? Because there is progress, and then inside the progress, like you just building an ECE system, then there are other things. Is that system equitable? Does it have parity, right? And so we continue to follow. But I do want to ground, I think I saw this in the chat, that ultimately, it is about systems change. How are we building ultimately a stronger, more equitable community? So to go to sort of Ruby's North Star, how are we really eradicating the types of historic disparities where either zip code or race are the predictors? And how are we building literal infrastructure that is in and people are part of the infrastructure. We talk about community engagement. There is no sustainable change, right? Like if there aren't meaningful conduits for the community's voice or power work. So I do want to be clear that there is always a leverage play. We are thinking with great intention about where those opportunities are to systematize what the investment is, right? Philanthropy of any sort, our dollars are pennies on the dollar. compared to state and governmental dollars. So we are always looking for where the leverage opportunities are to scale, right? And then, how we optimize building connective tissue. But we are looking at those, like, how are we, the real quality of life measures. Are we making a dent in maternal morbidity, right? Are we making a dent in pick your thing, right? So are we making real substantive, are we lifting the floor for families living in poverty? So we really do look at, yes, the stuff that what's happening in community, and then what's happening long term, because we do want to see the life experiences, right? The lived experiences of families, particularly vulnerable families, shift. That's the there.
I'm going to head to a different question unless Ruby or Thomas want to add on there. Are you okay if I move on to a different question? I'd like to weave in here the importance of communication. If everything that we do is the work, and those who deserve to know, need to know, don't know. So the role of communicating the why we're doing it, the what we're doing it, what are some of your, this is one of our methods of how we think about communicating our work. Could any of you address the power, the importance? Because otherwise boards get tired, people don't believe it anymore. So how do you look at use communications? Anybody want to take that?
I'll
Yeah,
jump
Ruby,
in just a little bit about like the content of the communications, as opposed to, like the what am I trying, the roadways, right? But the content, really thinking about not only what we're doing, why we're doing it, where the potential solution may have come from. For example, building a table of community members and local on the ground partners to attack collectively a problem in a small test of change, right? So we work through that, and then the communication of how we got there. So process, I think, is often really important for us, because what we've found is that while we might reach, let's say, a small solution on a very small scale in one building, how do we spread that, right? How do we first let people know what we were doing, how we were doing it? But most of the time it's the process part I found that's missing. Like, how did we get there? How would you replicate a similar process as opposed to the what? Because the what we're doing is going to look a little bit different in each community. But how we came to that place of that small test of change, what did we use? A theory of change model? What was it? How do we replicate that? So I think that's important more than, we get up and talk to boards, school boards, our own leadership, community leaders, but we often just talk about what we're doing, and I think we miss on the how we're doing it and how we got there in the first place.
I would like to layer on that, because I think it's good that we also try to capture what conditions allowed us to make change. Because again, back to every neighborhood's different, every city's different. If you just tell them this is how we did it, there may be some conditions that were absolutely critical to how we were able to bring it home. Just a thought. Anybody else have anything of how you think about making sure people know what's going on and are seeing the process? Does anybody have anything else they'd like to layer there?
Yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
Go ahead. Well, yeah, I would love to layer just two things in there, and thinking about that, and especially for a national funder that's in Flint, in a smaller community, being really thoughtful about the listening part of communication is really, really critical and important. How do we listen and hear the perspective of the local community from an individual standpoint, and from other community-based foundations, community-based organizations, be their funders or nonprofits? So I think there's a lot of the listening that we have to be really thoughtful about in terms of how that then transitions and translates into how we tell the story through the lens of those that are going to hear it, and kind of own part of the process of addressing the problems that are happening in our community. And I think the other side to that communication piece for us is really being thoughtful about when and how we communicate everything that Ruby said, and then when it's important for us to not communicate, and allow that space to exist for some of those other funders or some of those other organizations or community members to really lean into how they tell that story as we support them in the kind of in the background.
Great. And Deirdre. Get that mute button out of there. Get that mute button out of there.
Yes, there we go. I'll just add that amplifying the work of grantee partners, right? And so where the successes are, as much as possible, amplifying their work, right? I think is as important, critically important in the communication strategy.
Okay. I'm going to take advantage of being the moderator and throw out a favorite question. How do you help community groups, whatever, move from we have a poll we must do. So your poll came up. So while I'll continue to babble, please do engage in your poll here. All right. But I would love to hear how we help meet people, others, even ourselves, move from a mindset of scarcity. We don't have enough people, enough money, enough blah, but we don't have enough, to a mindset of abundance when we all come together. I think that moving from a mindset of scarcity to abundance is so important. But Sarah's going to tell me how I deal with a question when there's a poll up, because I'm not sure I understand that.
You can just close out of the poll.
I can close out of the poll. Isn't that good news? Okay. So would anybody like to talk about how do we help people move from a mindset of scarcity to abundance? Ruby.
At Casey Foundation, we have dedicated a lot of time, our own time and the time of our partners in all of our work around asset framing and the work of Trabian. That work is so important. We even look at our community. There's a map up in a conference room across from me that is our community map, and it is an asset map. What assets do we have? We try and just always think about that are on the ground. I know we have an asset in the room right now with us that is our Neighborhood Planning Unit V president. She's in here. She messaged me. She is an asset in this community. And so really trying to think and challenging each other. That's much easier to say, let's asset frame. Let's do it, than to do it. To really do like document reviews, where especially in education, we have been speaking about, as opposed to opportunity gaps, we've been just gazing at gaps for so many years and using very much a scarcity frame. So I think just challenging ourselves on that, and strengths-based leadership is another model that we can all leverage. But I would say those are two places that we've made investments in here at the Atlanta Civic site.
Deirdre, I think you were going to weigh in on this, or am I confused? I'm confused.
Not exactly. I'm doing a lot of nodding because Ruby's, I really appreciate her frame. The only other thing that I would add here is just the convening, right? Again, people like I find is when we bring partners together, they actually shift the conversation, right? To really expose where the opportunities are. And in really material ways that folks can say, oh, this is where the possibility is. Here's what has been done, right? So it's more than just conceptual. They're really able to then, build some building blocks. So the power of connection.
Okay. And Thomas, did you want to weigh in on scarcity to abundance, or you're good? Come on in.
I was just saying that's exactly where I was going. If you bring together a number of community members, there may be a few minutes of complaining about the challenges, but the vast majority of that time and energy will be focused on what values and what resources exist in the room between them. So being able to convene and being able to value that voice and perspective as a place-based funder helps you focus on the assets.
Well, I'm going to again take advantage of being the moderator and how thrilled I am to work with these powerhouses of passion. But I would love to give each one of them, because I bet you thought of something like, why doesn't she ask me this question? I would like to tell people this. I've got something to share. So could you each, I'm going to go in whatever order you want. What else would you like our participants to know? Which, by the way, I'd like to say, I have been on a lot of webinars. This is the only one I remember where the number of attendees grew over the webinar. Usually you have all kinds of drop off. You guys must have honey in your pocket because you're attracting all the bees who want to be in the hive. So bravo to you. But any closing remarks that you would like to make sure our audience is the time to get your wisdom? Who has some, and you all have a lot to share. So who's going to give me some? Ruby, you're on.
Thank you. I had a professor who studied a lot about the civil rights movement, and specifically the movement towards Brown v. Board. And she always used to remind us that there are times when you communicate from above the table, and there are times when you communicate from below the table. This is a strategy from the movement. Knowing when to put yourself up front to have the conversation, maybe to provide cover for another organization that can't say the things that you can say, and when it's time to allow the community members and the partners to be the lead. And at that point, we're under the table, above the table, or you're under the table, right? So just knowing that distinction, we should not always be the ones out in front. Much of our work that we do is behind the scenes, and it's fine with me if no one knows that it was us, right? Our egos have to be removed. So just remember knowing when to be above the table and below the table, because we have to learn from the historical struggles of our nation.
Well, and it's amazing what we can accomplish when we don't worry about who gets the credit. You know, it's amazing what we can accomplish. Deirdre, would you like to go next?
I don't get to say cosign again, do I?
No, you can't say cosign again.
I would just emphasize that this is what an incredible time to be doing this work. When we think about what's happened, so yes, the pandemic did open and create or facilitate incredible challenges. But to my colleague's point, Thomas, inside of those challenges have also been incredible opportunity. We've also seen our nation's ability to respond in unprecedented ways, right? So we are in an amazing time to be of doing this work, even as we grapple with unprecedented challenge, maybe not so unprecedented, old challenges with some new tools and solutions. There couldn't be a better time to be doing this work. Possibility is on the horizon, and I think lean into collaboration, lean into listening, and let's do this work together.
And then Thomas.
Thank you. I'll say, Deborah, you took my phrase, so I have to search for something else smart to say.
Sorry.
Because again, that phrase of you can get great things done if you're not worried about taking credit, I think that underscores everything that Ruby said. The first thing that came to my mind is this is, again, that space where there are spaces where there's credit to be taken, and then there are spaces where there's just work to be done, and it doesn't matter who gets the credit for doing that work. And I think that's critical and important. I think just I would circle back to that core value of, if this is really about, and these conversations are really about improving outcomes for kids and families, and that's the main thing that we're focused on in closing gaps in grade level reading, then the focus has to be on identifying the bevy of resources that are necessary. And resources does not just include money. It includes voice. It includes value. It includes people. What are those resources that are evident and prevalent in the individual community that come together to really resolve some of these challenges that for generations have continued to plague communities.
I just love this panel. I am just thrilled to have been a moderator with you. And I'm just going to add one phrase we use a lot. Who else cares and what's possible? Keeping on the who else cares and what's possible. And with that, I'm going to turn us over to Sarah, because I think she has logistical things she likes to do at the very end. Maybe not.
Sarah would prefer to just sit and let y'all keep talking for a couple more hours. But I guess it's not up to me. So I will do some logistical things. I just hope that you all saw, there were a couple comments in the chat about how I feel like I found my people. I'd like to, using Deirdre's language, I'll co-sign that. This was just an amazing conversation. There are a lot of things that keep me up at night, but the passion, the optimism, the commitment, the energy that you all shared today is what's going to get me out of bed tomorrow morning and all the mornings after that. It's an inspiration to really know that y'all are out there and doing this incredible work. So huge thank you to Deirdre Johnson-Burrell, to Ruby Sullivan, to Thomas Parker, to Jonathan Hui out there having fun with his family. And then huge thanks to Deborah Jacobs for being a thought partner throughout the planning process and just incredible conversation lead today. You brought so much to this conversation. So thank you, thank you, thank you.